It was a quiet evening when my phone rang, shattering the silence. The caller ID showed it was from the local hospital. My heart skipped a beat as I answered. The voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Mr. Johnson, your son, Michael, has been admitted to the emergency room. You need to come immediately." I dropped everything and rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with 1,000 questions. What happened? Was he okay? When I arrived, the sight of my son lying unconscious on the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, shattered me. His face was bruised and his body looked broken. I felt a surge of anger and helplessness. The doctor approached me and explained that Michael had been severely beaten. He was stable, but critical. As I sat by his side, holding his hand, he slowly regained consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at me with pain and fear. "Dad," he whispered weakly. I leaned closer, my voice trembling. "Michael, who did this to you?" He hesitated for a moment, then said, "It was Mom's lover, Jake. He found out his wife is pregnant with my child. He lost it, Dad. He attacked me." I froze. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My wife's affair partner? My son involved with his wife? A pregnancy? My mind was spinning, and I felt a mix of rage, confusion, and heartbreak. But before I could process it all, Michael handed me his phone. "Dad, there's something you need to hear." I took the phone, and what I heard next changed everything. I pressed play on Michael's phone, and a recording began. At first, there was silence, followed by the sound of muffled voices. Then, I heard her voice. My wife, Sarah. She was speaking to Jake, her lover. My stomach churned as I listened. "Jake, you need to calm down," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "This is getting out of hand. Michael didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Didn't mean to?" Jake shouted, his voice filled with rage. "Your son got my wife pregnant. Do you have any idea what this means? My marriage is over because of him." There was a pause, and then Sarah spoke again, her tone pleading. "Jake, please, we can figure this out. But hurting Michael won't solve anything. He's just a kid." "A kid?" Jake snapped. "He's old enough to ruin my life. If he thinks he can mess with my family, he's got another thing coming." The recording ended abruptly, leaving me in stunned silence. My hands were shaking, and my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. My wife had been having an affair with Jake, and now my son was caught in the middle of this mess. But how did Michael get involved with Jake's wife? And why was she pregnant with his child? I looked at Michael, who was struggling to stay awake. "Son, what happened? How did all of this start?" Michael took a deep breath, his voice weak but determined. "Dad, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't even know Mom was having an affair. I met Emily, Jake's wife, at a college event. We connected, and one thing led to another. I didn't know she was married to Jake until it was too late. When she told me she was pregnant, I was scared. But I wanted to do the right thing. I didn't know Jake would react like this." I felt a mix of anger and sadness. My son had unknowingly stepped into a web of betrayal and revenge, and now he was paying the price. But as I sat there, a fire began to burn inside me. Jake had hurt my son, and my wife had betrayed our family. I couldn't let this go unpunished. "Michael," I said firmly, "we're going to make this right. But first, we need proof. We need to know for sure if the child is yours. We'll get a DNA test. And as for Jake and your mother, they'll regret what they've done. Michael nodded weakly, and I could see the fear in his eyes. But I was determined to protect him and seek justice for what had been done to our family. Little did I know, the road ahead would be filled with even more shocking revelations. The next few days were a blur. Michael was recovering slowly, but the emotional scars ran deep. I couldn't stop thinking about the recording and the mess my family was in. My wife, Sarah, had been avoiding me, and I could see the guilt in her eyes every time we crossed paths. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, and I needed a plan. I reached out to Emily, Jake's wife, and arranged a meeting. She was hesitant at first, but when I explained that Michael was in the hospital because of Jake's actions, she agreed to talk. We met at a quiet cafe, and I could see the pain and regret in her eyes. "I'm so sorry about Michael," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted any of this to happen. I didn't know Jake would go this far." I nodded, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Emily, we need to know the truth. Is the child really Michael's?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, it's his. I've been wanting to tell him, but I was scared. Jake has a temper, and I didn't know how he'd react." I took a deep breath, trying to process everything. "We need a DNA test to confirm it. Once we have proof, we can figure out what to do next. But I need your help, Emily. Jake hurt my son, and my wife betrayed our family. I can't let this go." Emily looked at me with tears in her eyes. "What are you planning to do?" "I'm going to make sure Jake and Sarah pay for what they've done," I said firmly. "But I need you to play along. Can you do that?" She nodded reluctantly, and we began to put the plan into motion. A few days later, we got the DNA test results. As expected, the child was Michael's. I felt a mix of emotions: relief that we had proof, but also anger at how everything had unfolded. I showed the results to Michael, who was still recovering in the hospital. He looked at me with a determined expression. "Dad, I want to be there for Emily and the baby," Michael said. "But I also want to make sure Jake and Mom face the consequences of what they've done." I nodded. "We will, son. But we need to be smart about this. Revenge isn't just about hurting them. It's about exposing the truth and making sure they can't hurt anyone else." Over the next few weeks, Emily and I worked together to gather evidence against Jake and Sarah. We recorded conversations, collected messages, and documented everything. Meanwhile, I pretended to be oblivious to Sarah's affair, playing the role of the clueless husband. It was hard, but I knew it was necessary. Finally, the day came when we had enough evidence to confront them. I invited Sarah and Jake to our house under the pretense of discussing Michael's recovery. What they didn't know was that Emily and Michael were also there, waiting in the next room. As Sarah and Jake walked in, I could see the tension in their eyes. They had no idea what was coming. As the days passed, the tension in our household grew unbearable. Sarah continued to act as if nothing was wrong, but I could see the cracks in her facade. She would sneak out late at night, claiming she was going to the gym or meeting a friend, but I knew better. I had started tracking her movements, and every time she left, my heart sank a little more. One night I decided to follow her. She drove to a secluded part of town and parked outside a small, dimly lit cafe. I watched from a distance as she met Jake inside. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I fought the urge to storm in and confront them. But I knew I had to stay calm. I needed more evidence. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Through the cafe window, I could see Sarah and Jake arguing. Their voices were muffled, but I could tell the conversation was heated. Suddenly, Jake slammed his fist on the table, causing Sarah to flinch. My heart raced as I wondered what they were fighting about. Was it about Michael? Or was there something else going on? After what felt like an eternity, Sarah left the cafe, her face pale and her hands trembling. I followed her home, my mind racing with questions. What had Jake said to her? And why did she look so scared? The next morning, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, and a deep, menacing voice greeted me. "Mr. Johnson," the voice said, "you've been poking your nose where it doesn't belong. I suggest you back off before things get ugly." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" I demanded. The caller chuckled darkly. "Let's just say I'm a friend of Jake's, and if you know what's good for you, you'll stay out of his business." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there, my heart pounding. Who was this person? And how much did they know about my investigation? Later that day, I met with Emily to discuss the DNA results and our next steps. But as we talked, I noticed she was acting strangely. She kept glancing over her shoulder, as if she was being watched, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Emily, what's wrong?" I asked, concerned. She hesitated, then burst into a "I'm so sorry, Mr. Johnson. There's something I haven't told you. Jake, he's not just angry about the pregnancy. He's involved in something much bigger, something dangerous." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Emily took a deep breath. "Jake has been laundering money through his business. He's connected to some very powerful people. And if they find out about the pregnancy, they'll come after all of us. That's why he's so desperate to keep this quiet." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was bigger than I had imagined. Jake wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a criminal. And now my family was caught in the crossfire. When I returned to the hospital to check on Michael, I found him sitting up in bed, his face pale and his eyes wide with fear. "Dad," he said urgently, "we need to talk." I sat down beside him, my heart racing. "What is it, son?" Michael handed me his phone. "I found something on Mom's laptop. She left it here by mistake, and I went through her emails. Dad, she's not just having an affair with Jake. She's been helping him with his money laundering. She's in deep, and she's scared." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My wife wasn't just a cheater. She was a criminal. And now my son and I were caught in the middle of a dangerous game. That night, I confronted Sarah. I showed her the evidence we had gathered, the DNA results, the recordings, and the emails. At first, she denied everything, but as I laid out the facts, her defenses crumbled. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. She sobbed. "Jake blackmailed me into helping him. He said if I didn't, he'd ruin our family. I was scared, and I didn't know what to do." I felt a mix of anger and pity. "Sarah, you should have come to me. We could have figured this out together. But now, it's too late. Jake has hurt our son, and he's put all of us in danger. We need to end this, once and for all." After confronting Sarah, I knew we had to act fast. Jake was dangerous, and his connections made him even more of a threat. But I wasn't going to let him destroy my family. I called Emily and Michael, and we met in secret to discuss our next steps. "We need to expose Jake," I said, my voice firm. "But we have to be careful. If we go after him directly, he'll come after us. We need to hit him where it hurts, his reputation and his illegal operations." Emily nodded, her face pale but determined. "I can help with that. I have access to his financial records and some of his contacts. If we can get that information to the authorities, they'll have enough to take him down." Michael, still recovering but full of anger, added, "And we need to make sure Mom is safe. She made a mistake, but she's still family. We can't let Jake hurt her." I agreed. Despite everything Sarah had done, she was still the mother of my child, and I couldn't abandon her. But we had to be smart about this. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart. Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly to gather evidence against Jake. Emily provided us with documents detailing his money laundering activities, while Michael and I focused on recording conversations and tracking his movements. It was risky, but we had no other choice. One evening, we set up a meeting with Jake, pretending to negotiate a deal to keep everything quiet. We chose a public place, a busy restaurant, to minimize the risk of him doing something reckless. Emily and I went together, while Michael stayed behind to monitor the situation remotely. As we sat down with Jake, I could see the arrogance in his eyes. He thought he had the upper hand, but little did he know, we were about to turn the tables on him. "So, what's it going to be?" Jake asked, leaning back in his chair. "You want me to leave your family alone? Fine. But it's going to cost you." I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. "We're not here to negotiate, Jake. We're here to give you one last chance to come clean. Turn yourself in, and maybe the authorities will go easy on you." Jake laughed, a cold, mocking sound. "You think you can scare me? I have friends in high places, Johnson. You're nothing compared to me." That's when Emily stepped in. "You're wrong, Jake. We have everything. Your financial records, your contacts, even recordings of your conversations. If you don't turn yourself in, we'll take it all to the police." For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in Jake's eyes. But it was quickly replaced by rage. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You're making a big mistake," he snarled. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before he could say anything else, I pulled out my phone and played a recording of his earlier threats. His face turned pale as he realized he was trapped. Just as we thought we had Jake cornered, something unexpected happened. A group of men in suits entered the restaurant and walked straight toward our table. My heart raced as I wondered if they were Jake's associates. But then one of them flashed a badge. "Jake Thompson," the man said, his voice authoritative, "you're under arrest for money laundering, extortion, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." Jake's face turned white as the officers handcuffed him and led him away. I looked at Emily, confused. "Did you call the police?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't. I have no idea who did." That's when I noticed Sarah standing near the entrance, her face filled with a mix of relief and guilt. She had been the one to tip off the authorities. Despite everything, she had finally chosen to do the right thing. As Jake was led away in handcuffs, the restaurant erupted into whispers and murmurs. Emily and I exchanged a look of relief, but the battle wasn't over yet. Sarah stood near the entrance, her eyes filled with tears, and I knew we needed to have a long, painful conversation. I walked over to her, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, betrayal, and pity. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady but cold, "we need to talk." She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. We left the restaurant and found a quiet spot outside. The night air was cool, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. "I'm so sorry," Sarah began, her voice breaking. "I never wanted any of this to happen. Jake blackmailed me into helping him. He said if I didn't, he'd ruin our family." I was scared, and I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "You should have come to me, Sarah. We could have figured this out together. Instead, you kept lying. And now, our son is paying the price." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you and Michael, but I'm trying to make things right. That's why I called the police. I couldn't let Jake destroy us anymore." I felt a pang of sympathy, but the betrayal still stung. "Sarah, I don't know if I can forgive you, but for Michael's sake, we'll figure this out. Right now, we need to focus on keeping our family safe." Over the next few weeks, Michael's physical wounds began to heal, but the emotional scars remained. He was struggling to come to terms with everything that had happened: his mother's betrayal, his own mistakes, and the danger we had all been in. One evening, as we sat together in the hospital room, Michael looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't mean to cause all of this." I placed a hand on his shoulder, my heart aching for him. "Michael, you're not to blame. Jake and your mother made their choices, and they're the ones who need to take responsibility. You're my son, and I'm proud of you for standing up and doing the right thing." He nodded, but I could see the guilt still weighing heavily on him. It would take time for him to heal, but I was determined to be there for him every step of the way. With Jake in custody and Sarah cooperating with the authorities, we decided to take one final step to ensure justice was served. We reached out to a journalist we trusted and shared the full story: Jake's crimes, Sarah's involvement, and the danger our family had faced. The story made headlines, exposing Jake's illegal activities and the corruption within his network. The public outcry was overwhelming, and it wasn't long before Jake's powerful associates began to distance themselves from him. He was facing multiple charges, and it was clear he wouldn't be able to weasel his way out of this one. As for Sarah, she agreed to testify against Jake in exchange for a reduced sentence. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. She knew she had to take responsibility for her actions, no matter how painful it was. The ordeal had taken a toll on all of us, but it had also brought us closer together. Michael, Emily, and I had formed an unbreakable bond, and we were determined to move forward as a family. Sarah's future was uncertain, but she had taken the first step toward redemption. One evening, as we sat together at home, Michael turned to me and said, "Dad, I'm scared about what's going to happen next, but I'm glad we're in this together." I smiled, feeling a sense of hope for the first time in months. "We'll get through this, son. No matter what happens, we'll face it together." With Jake in custody and Sarah cooperating with the authorities, we thought the worst was behind us. But there was one final piece of the puzzle that needed to be addressed: The DNA result. Emily's pregnancy had been the catalyst for everything, and we needed to know the truth, once and for all. The DNA test confirmed what we already suspected. The child was Michael's. Emily broke down in tears when she saw the results, her emotions a mix of relief and fear. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling. I placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "Now, we make sure you and the baby are safe. Jake can't hurt you anymore, and Michael will be there for you every step of the way." Michael, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Emily, I know I made mistakes, but I want to do right by you and the baby. We'll figure this out together." Emily nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. For the first time in months, it felt like there was hope for the future. But there was one thing left to do, something that would bring closure to the pain and betrayal we had endured. I had saved the audio recordings of Jake's threats and Sarah's confessions, and I knew exactly how to use them. I reached out to a close friend who worked in media and shared the recordings with him. "This needs to be heard," I said. "The world needs to know what kind of man Jake Thompson really is." The next day, the recordings were released to the public. The audio of Jake's menacing threats and Sarah's tearful confessions went viral, sparking outrage and condemnation. Jake's reputation was destroyed, and even his powerful associates couldn't protect him from the fallout. As I listened to the audio one last time, I felt a mix of sadness and satisfaction. It wasn't the revenge I had imagined, but it was justice. Jake had hurt my family, and now he was paying the price. The months that followed were a time of healing and rebuilding. Michael and Emily grew closer, preparing for the arrival of their child. Sarah, though still facing the consequences of her actions, was determined to make amends. She apologized to Michael and me, and though the wounds were still fresh, we began to forgive her. One evening, as we all sat together at home, Michael played a recording of the baby's heartbeat. The sound filled the room, a reminder of the new life that was about to join our family. It was a bittersweet moment, a mix of joy for the future and sorrow for the pain we had endured. "Dad," Michael said, his voice filled with emotion, "I know this hasn't been easy, but I'm glad we're here together. We've been through hell, but we made it." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride and relief. "We did, son, and no matter what happens, we'll face it together." As I look back on everything that happened, I realize that revenge isn't about hurting others. It's about finding justice and protecting the ones you love. The DNA result, the sad audio, the pain and betrayal, it all led us to this moment. And though the road was long and difficult, we emerged stronger than ever. To anyone out there going through a similar struggle, remember this: you are not alone. Hold on to the people who matter, and never stop fighting for what's right. Because in the end, love and family are worth every battle.